How's it going? Um, maybe if someone could let me know what the sound is like on this. Because there was a ringing in the background the last time, so I'll just give it a minute until someone pops up. Testing. Sound okay? Is there like a bad ringing in the background right now? There's nothing else to do delayed or something. Yeah. I suppose I'll just start. The last video, I was talking about kind of how Northern Ireland kind of got into a really weird state. It kind of got up to, kind of fuzzily around the 1960s, kind of, with how Donaldson did a lot of stuff. So I'm going to start from, basically, the last video was kind of like an Irish mindset, from a free space kind of perspective of 32 County. Sounds not too good. Right, let me see how I can sort this out a little bit. 2 seconds. Is this any better? Sorry for the delay. I thought I had it kind of half set up. Is it like a ringing or is it like audio stuff? Hang on. Which is I think swap over. I'll see if this is any better.
Can you hear me now? Testing, 1, 2, 3. Is it like a ringing or is it like whatever? Sound is bad. Right. Is it? Oh, much better. That's good to hear. Right, sure. I'll just have to kind of struggle on it this year. I don't know what. I'll need to go through like OBS or something like that for get a better sound, and maybe just a better microphone might be the best answer. But anyways, I was starting. I was just saying, like the last video was kind of like, basically from Gaelic rule up until kind of, Ulster was ruled by 100% by underwater sound. All right, deadly. There was up until like Gaelic rule up until Ulster had been completely kind of become an extreme part of the the kingdom. And I'm gonna like start off. I mentioned the last day. I said his name was Basilbrook, but it's Cecilbrook was his name, and he was the guy that started that Fermanagh Vigilance, and he wound up after World War II becoming the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland. And after World War II, the Labour Party got in Britain, and they brought in like welfare, and that meant in Northern Ireland that for the first time Catholics could get free university education, and that was a big thing because it was those guys like in whatever like 40s and 50s that nearly led the civil rights movement, like these highly educated Catholics that didn't exist in Northern Ireland before, like, and that kind of kicked things off. Like, people kind of started, getting educated, looking around the world and seeing what was happening and how to best kind of, fix their situation. And that's like how the civil rights movement came about. But basically by 1960 was kind of like a very bad era in the north economically, because like you had like the linen industry and boat building, like the Harland and Wolff shipyard, like that was their like two things they were famous for, and they both kind of like, I think the last cruise liner built in Northern Ireland was in 1960, and the linen industry was on its knees because you had like nylon and all these synthetic fibers being made, and it was just nobody wanted linen anymore. But basically, Lord Brookborough, as he became known, that Cecil Brook fella, he he stood down in 1963, I think it was, and he was there for 20 odd years, and a guy called Terence O'Neill, Captain Terence O'Neill, took over. He was an Orange man as well, like all prime ministers of Northern Ireland from 1921 until it collapsed in 1973 were all Orange Order members. But Terence O'Neill, he was born and raised in London, and he had a kind of a very kind of a cosmopolitan kind of approach to things. Like he's seen, he was like he didn't want to be ruling a country like that wasn't modern. If you get me, like he tried to modernize Northern Ireland. Like it was him that started getting motorways built and bringing in like multinational companies, and like he started all this crack. Like there was a thing they were going to build a university, and Derry would have been the obvious solution. This was in 1965. Derry would have been like the obvious answer because of the second largest city, like, and it didn't have a university. And the Unionists decided against Derry and decided to put it in Coleraine instead. And they also planned a city like similar to like Shannon in Limerick, and they built Craigavon. Like it's only like kind of a town now, but it was a planned city, But what was I going to say? Where am I wrote out a shitload of notes here because this is it gets very kind of all over the place kind of stuff, But I go back to 1954, right? They brought in a law in Northern Ireland that it was illegal to fly the tricolour. Like it was technically you weren't allowed to fly any flag except the Union Jack, but it was only ever used against for people that was flying tricolours. And that kind of come in because it became important because there was a fella called Ian Paisley who was you all would have heard of him. And in 1964 there was an election in the north, and a nationalist candidate in Belfast, had a tricolour hanging out his office window, and Paisley went to the police like ranting and raving and spitting, and as he done, and told them like take down that flag or we'll go in and we'll take it down for you. And the RUC were kind of like, oh Jesus lads, like could you not just leave it? And Paisley then got a crowd of a couple of thousand Unionists. They went in, riots started all around Belfast anyway. So that was the kind of situation we're in. You had a kind of a moderate, kind of reformist prime minister that didn't have full support, like because a lot of people were getting pulled towards like Ian Paisley and this like extreme version of Protestantism, where it was like the Catholics are devils basically, and the Protestants are like the good people. And it was around this time as well. Like you probably heard of Springtown Camp. It was a housing estate in Derry. Like they started off protesting because they were squatters. They had nowhere to live after World War II, and thousands of Catholics just started pouring into this old U.S. military barracks. Do you know like what you call them, the Nissan huts or something you call them? And they were living there for decades. Like they were getting no houses or anything like that. And this group, the civil rights movement, the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, and the Derry Housing Committee, whatever it's called, it's DACA or whatever. You know what I'm on about, the Derry Housing Commission. I don't know what the name of it is. It was like a load of socialist Republicans. But the civil rights movement, it started off with 5 demands, and they were basically the gist of them was to disband the B specials, that there would be one man, one vote, that there be equal opportunities in housing and jobs, and repeal of the emergency of the Civil Powers Act that basically gave totalitarian powers to the northern government. And any step towards any of those goals was seen by like Paisley and all as like the march of papacy popery into the north and an eventual united Ireland. So they dug their heels in like 100%. We're never going to give an inch. And that's how it ended up then. You ended up with, I couldn't remember the name of this the last day. It was Burntallet Bridge in Derry, where the RUC and the B Specials ambushed the civil rights protesters. And that, you kind of know the start of the troubles at this stage, I think. It kind of, I'm trying to think where would be the best place now to kind of take this, because the troubles become such a convoluted issue. Do you know, whenever you're trying to tell 4 or 5 angles in a different story, Brian Brew, where are we at now? The 60s. Yeah, we're leading into the troubles here now. Like, I'm just trying to figure out which way to start it. What I think I'll do is I'll just start at where most people kind of consider the major part of the trouble starting, and that's the Battle of the Bog Site. I had mentioned before, like, the apprentice boys, like the Orange Men, march in Derry every year. And anyways, in 1969, there was a riot broke out. There's a video of it. There's loads of videos of it. And it turned into the Battle of the Bog Site. And what it was that people were terrified. Like, the couple of rocks was thrown, and it just kept escalating. And it got to the stage then where people in Derry were just like, I don't, we can't let the RUC or the B Specials in here because they're going to be reprisal attacks. So they were like, right, we're just going to barricade off our part of the town, like, the Bog Site. And that's the establishment of Free Derry. And for the next, 3 years, Free Derry was a no-go zone to British soldiers. And it was run by the IRA, was the police, and people kind of governed themselves, And the establishment of Free Derry, the riots that established it, they spread all around the north, and it was an absolute disaster. And that's whenever Liam Lynch made the speech, we can no longer stand by. And at this stage, like, there was a protest in Dublin even at this stage that was Irish people demanding that the Irish army go into, invade the north. And we see People's Democracy march from Derry to Belfast. That's the Burntallet Bridge incident. Let me see now. Yeah, like, in August of 1969, what happened was the socialist leadership in Dublin was saying, like, that they weren't going to take up physical action because they wanted like a propaganda kind of war. And they felt like they were gaining support just by doing nothing, like just by Catholics being burnt out of their homes. But a group of Northern IRA members went to the Belfast leadership and told them, like, to stop taking orders from Dublin and get a defensive network set up, And that led to the split then in late 1969, around Christmas, of the provisionals and the officials. And they kind of operated alongside each other, The officials, they only engaged in, like, warfare as reprisal attacks. Like, if a soldier shot someone, they go out and shoot a soldier or whatever. And that was their way of doing it. But whereas the IRA, what their idea was that like, there was multiple kind of angles to it. Like, if you're trying to keep the British Army from coming into your part of town, you're just going to cause havoc in a different part of town. Like, that's why the IRA used to set off, like, car bombs where, they weren't planning on killing anyone. It was just to cause mayhem somewhere else, to keep the pressure off the people in Derry, or Belfast or wherever. And whenever the British soldiers landed, that was known as Operation Banner, and that was the longest military campaign of the, like, modern Brits. And it was like one of their. It was amazing, like, how ungovernable the place came. Like, I read out a big list of events that happened kind of throughout the thing, but it's kind of like you get very bogged down in it, and it kind of like takes up too much time. You really, like, because each of these things is like there's documentaries on them, like the Glenanne gang, or the Loughlin Island massacre, or Miami Showbat. Like we all know what happened. Like it was a massive war. Really messed up stuff happened. Like in 1971, the Northern Irish government, they enacted they started interning prisoners in Long Cash. That was the start of Long Cash, and it was an old RAF base. It was them huts, the half round huts, Nissan huts or Nissan huts, whatever. And they basically just put up cages around like one of them or two of them, and then like a guard post, and then they just like had loads of these little cages, they were called. And in August 1971, they started internment. They just went in, and anyone that they suspected of being an IRA member was put into these cages. And they arrested, I think it was about 380 or something odd people in the first night of it. But the problem was that they only got about 10% of them were IRA members, and the rest was all like fellas that weren't involved, or continuity members that had, weren't fighting, like that. They weren't on the offensive. Like they were only kind of looking for the provisional IRA. And there was a lot of pressure then in the south about obviously like the anti-H block movement that you had, and it kind of was building up massive pressure in Ireland. The problem was then that out of the 5 demands in what you call them, Terence O'Neill's, that he tried to kind of like give to Catholics, he kind of started trying to give like one man, one vote to people in Derry, and it was kind of like everything was kind of like given but watered down. Like like the B specials eventually would be got rid of, but they were just replaced with a thing called the Ulster Defence Regiment, which was just like instead of like a reserve police force, they just became a reserve military. And he had to go. Like he called an election in I think 1969, and his cabinet was split. Half of them supported him, and then the other half were like they followed this other guy, like Faulkner. And Faulkner was slightly more hardline, but you still had Paisley and his crowd, and there was this here Protestant group. Paisley had his own paramilitary, like the Ulster Protestant Action, I think it was called, and like he stirred them up because he was like, "Oh, the IRA is coming back," and this was before anything happened. Like, but that turned into like mobs rampaging around. Like, was just agitated the entire situation, and yeah, total mess. You kind of get into then. I'm going to try and get into this. Like, basically, the IRA bait back the British Army from the areas that they controlled. You had no-go zones in Belfast and Derry, and the British Army knew like that they weren't going to be able to like physically beat the IRA, like, so they had to try and find out a way to get them to talk. So in 1962, I think no, not 62, 1972, you had a couple of like very short ceasefires. Gaddafi, that was the year Gaddafi sent all the weaponry into the north. Like, you had rocket launchers and all were on the scene now at this stage. So they called a ceasefire in June of 1972, and they had talks with the British Army, and the British Army agreed, they kind of settled on a ceasefire that the IRA would be allowed to police their own areas, and the army wouldn't get involved in those areas. Like, they'd just be allowed to kind of like basically secede the nationalist areas out of the state. And that went on for about 2 weeks. It kind of worked. But the government in Northern Ireland then pressured the British Army into backing up the RUC in order to raid homes. So in a place called Lanadoon or Lenadoon, whatever way it is. There was houses vacated by Protestants, and they fled the area. Yeah, they were gone, and Catholics had fled from somewhere else, and they had come into that area. So the IRA decided, right, we're going to take over these houses, and we're going to put these families, these Catholic families, into them houses. But the problem was that the British Army was like, if they get put into them houses, there's going to be another fucking war, because this place is half Protestant. And the British Army stopped the IRA. They started like ramming the truck with the with all the people's furniture. Like it was like 16 families or something like that was supposed to be moving in. And the IRA then just basically said, right, you know, to their own guys, they were like, right, tell everyone to clear the area and tell the army that the truce is off and we're back at war. So Francis Hughes, I think, was in charge of one of the battalions at that stage in Belfast. So a massive fight broke out. It went on for, I think, a week solid, like, of just fighting. And like the IRA, like both the provisionals and the officials were fighting in that, but the provisionals were far larger, and you know, kind of more militant than the officials. Like, so that completely broke down any kind of chance of of you know, kind of a peaceful kind of solution after, you know, three odd years of bombing and all that kind of crack. Because there was a lot of IRA fellas that kind of figured out we have them at the negotiating table now. But those other fellas saying no, we have to keep pushing while they're on the back foot. Like, so, and it was about 2 weeks after this battle in Lenadoon, there was a thing called Bloody Friday. And Bloody Friday was a show of strength by the IRA that they launched or detonated 22 car bombs in Belfast city centre in the space of an hour. And it killed, I think it was 9 people as far as I remember. And 10 days later, the British were like, we can't like put up with this anymore. Like we have no, you know, we can't be letting this happen in the country with no-go zones that were essentially like seceding from the state. The Unionists at this stage had organised, I mentioned the place, yeah, like, what was it? 1916, 50th anniversary, says Brainbury. Yeah, that's what. Yeah, that was the impetus for militant Protestantism to kind of resurge in the north. Paisley hyping all that up, you know, Bible bash and all that kind of crack. But what was I saying there? Bloody Friday. Yeah, then 10 days after Bloody Friday, there was a thing called Operation Motorman, and Operation Motorman was 30,000 British soldiers in Belfast and Derry with tanks and bulldozers went in and cleared all the barricades to get rid of all the no-go zones. Because the Unionists had been setting up no-go zones at this stage as well. Like a vanguard was a name of it was kind of like a UDA front, you know, that kind of way. They actually turned into a political party then later on, but there were. It was a real kind of mess. The British kind of realised that the whatever they were doing wasn't working. Like, so they decided we're going to have to come up with a solution, and their solution was a power sharing government. So, first of all, they actually did try to give a border poll. They gave, I think it was in 1972, there was a vote. Do you want Northern Ireland to remain in the United Kingdom? And nationalists boycotted the vote because they knew they wouldn't win. Like, so they're just like, right, forget about that. Like, we'll get something else done. So, yeah, you had this idea kind of brewing. You had the main kind of players, like, you know, the SDLP and the Alliance Party would have been, like, they started in 1970, and then you had Ian Paisley's crowd. I think they were. I'm not sure if they were the DUP at that stage yet, but it was his. They were all kind of the same. Like, on the loyalist side, they're all mixed through each other. Like, you know, it's basically the only real division is whether they're unionist, which is kind of like a pro-British state kind of, you know, traditional unionist, and then there's loyalists, and they're like, you know, the UVF kind of radical kind of fellas that just kind of use the unionists as a political vehicle, you know. And around this time as well, yeah, Shankill butchers. I don't want to go into any of this because like that is it makes me miserable. Like thinking about that crack. Like, but and it was 1973. Sunningdale. It gets proposed, and they changed the Special Powers Act. It was actually that was whenever they got rid of the death penalty in Northern Ireland, and they brought in no jury trials, for anyone that was like committing terrorism. So they held this election anyway, 1974, and it was basically an election for to see who would be sitting down. And Marius is DUP in 1971. Thanks very much. Yeah, there was Vanguard. Vanguard were kind of like the main um, kind of staunch loyalist kind of group. You had the traditional kind of unionist party. So in the British elections in 1974, you had Vanguard. They won 3 seats. The Unionist Party won 7 seats, and the DUP won a single seat. And this was like at the time you had Ian Paisley standing up saying like Faulkner, he was leading the Unionist Party at the time, that he couldn't control it anymore and he had to resign and all this kind of crack. But on May the 14th, the Ulster workers striked. All the unionists stopped working. They stopped working in the power stations. They stopped working, delivering food, anything at all. Like they just stopped, and loads of rioting broke out. Like basically Portadown and all was wild bad. Like because it's 70% like Protestant and 30% Catholic, and that's where in times to come, like you'd hear Garvaghey Road. Like that's where that all kicked off. Like, but for the Ulster workers were rioting and not doing any, like not working for a week. But halfway through that week, that's when the UVF launched the Dublin and Monaghan bombings, two no warning attacks. And I think it was 33 people killed. And there was collusion between the RUC and the UVF doing that, And the UVF used to come into the site quite a bit, like the East Donegal especially, like they used to come in and like execute people, and they were in Cavan now and again, and obviously they attacked the RTE headquarters at one stage, and in Donegal they tried to. This was directly funded by Ian Paisley. He tried to send down unionists to blow up the dam in Ballyshannon to try and blame the IRA. Like that's what they used to do as well. Like they used to bomb their own services, like water treatment stations and electricity, places and all this kind of crack, to make it look like the IRA was attacking them. Like that's how he was whipping people up all the time. So after the Sunningdale kind of agreement, it worked out. It was very similar to the Good Friday Agreement, where instead of a party that wins getting to pick all the seats, it was like, oh well, if you got 15% of the vote, you get 15% of the ministries. It's similar to how it works now at the moment, but it had a lot of kind of legal differences, because at that time Ireland, like the Republic of Ireland, still laid claim to the north, and that's kind of like what the main gripe for people not agreeing with the Good Friday Agreement is, like that it relinquishes our claim that Northern Ireland is Irish, and the Sunningdale kind of got around that, and it established a north-south committee. Like the government in the Republic and the government in the north were supposed to be like meeting each other and all. But after this strike, basically, the unionists just said, right, we're not going to fucking operate. If this isn't a unionist state, we're not taking part in it. And they told the British Army, like, you're going to have to, do all the food deliveries, run all the ESB or electricity stations. You're going to have to deliver all the coal because we're not doing it. So obviously, then the British Army were like, we were not able to do that. Like, we're not able to run an entire country for people that don't want to work. So the Sunningdale Agreement collapsed. So that was a disaster, really. Because whenever the Sunningdale Agreement collapsed, that was when we got direct rule from London. And London has proved itself to be an absolute mess at trying to run the North. Like, they just cannot manage it. Like, the North can barely manage running the North. Like, but London just kind of done it their way, and it did not suit. I'll just run through, right? From the time Stormont collapsed after the Sunningdale Agreement, I kind of go through like some of the stuff. Like 1975, you have the Miami Show Band, the 3 people murdered by Unionists. 1976, you got the Kingsmill Massacre. That's whenever the IRA executed, I think, 8 or 9 Protestant people, just specifically because they were Protestants. And you got to understand too, I mentioned the Shankill Butchers there. The UVF mindset was that if you can't get an IRA man, it doesn't matter, just get any Catholic at all. Like the Shankill Butchers were the worst people that ever walked the face of the earth. Like the things that they did to people just because they were Catholics was absolutely sick. But this is why there was such hatred. It still is unbelievable. In a lot of places, and then at the same time, around this time, you had around the time of the Miami Showbat Massacre, the official IRA and the IRA were fighting each other. They were feuding, killed another dozen between them. And it kind of went on for years. That those Republican clubs, they're called, they were kind of like the official IRA, public kind of meeting groups weren't quite public, but kind of slightly more public than being in the IRA kind of thing. And they used to get shot at, and they used to shoot back at the IRA, and there was people kids picking up booby trap bombs, and it was just fucking. You see, this is why I don't kind of want to go into the whole back and forth kind of thing, trying to keep it down to what the absolute kind of minimum kind of situation would have been. But what it kind of came to is that in 1976, political prisoner status was rejected for IRA prisoners. They were we're not criminals. We're prisoners of war, political prisoners, and the British said no to that, and that led to the prisoners in Long Cash and different jails, Long Cash especially, not wearing prison uniforms, refusing to wear prison uniforms. So all they had was blankets to wear. So that was the blankets, if they were the men on the blankets, And that obviously escalated over time, you had 1978, the European Court of Human Rights declared that England's treatment of IRA prisoners was cruel and inhumane punishment, but the English didn't care, 1979, you had Warren Point and Mountbatten on the same day. And 1980 is whenever the first hunger strike took place in Long Cash, and Charlie Haughey had come back from the being accused of gun running to becoming the Taoiseach at this stage, and he met with Margaret Thatcher. She was the Prime Minister at this stage, and the first hunger strike protest got called off because they thought, the prisoners thought that that something was going to be done, that their demands were going to be granted, but they weren't. So what happened then was in March in 1981, another hunger strike started, and that was led by Bobby Sands, and he was elected as the MP for Fermanagh South Tyrone while he was on the hunger strikes. And eventually then, Kieran Doherty, he became the TD for Cavan Monaghan. But in the end up, you yourself, 10 of them died. So that was a major, you had a lot of protests at this. Anyone that was alive at the time, you would have had to been living under a rock. But it was kind of a pure and total disaster. Sinn Féin now were allowed to start running in the north again, and in their first election back, led by Gerry Adams, they won 5 seats. And then 1983, you had a prison break from Long Cash. It was the largest prison break in British history. And in 1985, then that's whenever Garvaghey Road started all kicking off again. So yeah, just Lockall ambush in 1987. Then you had a reprisal attack from the IRA at the Enniskillen bombing. Then you had in 1988. This is kind of a big one. You had 3 unarmed IRA members, 2 men and a woman, were shot in Gibraltar in broad daylight on the street by the British soldiers, and they were brought back to the north to be buried. And at that funeral, a loyalist called Michael Stone, attacked the funeral, throwing hand grenades and shooting 2 handguns into the crowd. He killed 3 people and injured 50 or 100 others. And he was actually kidnapped, or he was captured while he was doing that by the IRA. And he had inside knowledge that there would be no. The IRA had agreed with the RUC that they wouldn't fire guns over the coffin, give the 3-gun salute or whatever. And the RUC agreed, right, sure, we'll stand back, we'll stay half a mile away, but if anything kicks off, we're going to land in. That was grand. Somehow Michael Stone found this out, and that's part of the collusion. And he knew that there'd be no defence forces there, or no British state forces, so he knew he could attack. And whenever he got captured by the IRA, he was thrown into a van, and they were taking him away to execute him. But suddenly, then the British just magically turned up and took Michael Stone away. And in reprisal for that, what happened then was a thing called the corporal killings, and what that was 2 British soldiers were in plain clothes and they were driving through a Catholic area, and someone realised, this was only a couple of days after, someone realised, oh, they're fucking British soldiers. So a mob just formed instantly and dragged them out of their car, bait them half to death, and then they got dragged around the corner and executed. And that was the vitriol that was in the place at the time. And why it was such a difficult path to peace. And just after this, then Sinn Féin got banned off the fucking radio waves. Then so you had Section 31, or whatever you call it, which is basically what nationalists are getting in the South these days for kind of all peaceful kind of stuff, But there was collusion going on both sides. There was collusion between loyalists and the RUC. There was collusion between the Gardaí and loyalists and the RUC and the IRA at times. The chief superintendent of the RUC was executed because apparently the Gardaí knew all about it, and were able to pass information on to the IRA, so they were able to ambush them. But at the same time, Pat Finucane, he was a Belfast politician, and he was executed by paramilitaries, kind of a Glenanne gang kind of thing. That was the most blatant kind of collusion going. You've probably all seen that Unquiet Graves. It's just well worth a watch. It's kind of harrowing kind of stuff too. But you had Gerry Adams kind of hinting in 1989. He was kind of we're gonna aim for a peaceful resolution to this, if we can get it. And 1990, you kind of had the 5th demand of the whatchamacallums, the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. So they got employment, Fair Employment Act. So that was kind of one of their main demands, because it was always Catholics that kind of got the raw deal with jobs and all that, only Catholics could only get certain jobs, and 1982, then you had kind of Mary Robinson was president, and she was the first Irish president to go go on a state visit to Belfast. And in 1993, you see, this is it's heating up into kind of the modern day here. In 1993, you had the Downing Street Declaration, and that's the kind of prototype of the guidelines of the Good Friday Agreement. It was the Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1985. It was basically unless it kind of started the Anglo-Irish was kind of The North is part of the UK, but if people want to join the South, they can, kind of thing. If it's democratic. And the Downing Street Declaration was kind of a reaffirmation of that, as things was kind of changing a bit, and the kind of people were sick of war at this stage. If you're at war for 25 years, and people just not even a kind of an Iraq war kind of situation, which would be terrible. But you don't know when you're gonna when someone's gonna pop up with a gun, firing across the border. Strabane at one stage was the most bombed town in the world, I'm pretty sure, back in the 70s. It was just completely destroyed. It was bad. In Claudy, just up the road from it, had some wild bad bombings as well. Those ones just kids and everything. It was fucking brutal. But in 1984, he had this accident. It was one of them, Chinook helicopters, the double rotor yokes. Or one of them was carrying 25 British officials in Scotland or wherever, wherever the Mullican Tower is. And it was heavy fog, and it came down and it killed all 25 of them, which incidentally, most of them were all the highest ranking British intelligence officers. So that kind of put them into a bit of fucking disarray. But in 1994, in August, because of the way the talks were kind of developing, Sinn Féin wanted to be at the table. So the IRA announced the ceasefire in August. And then about a month or two later, the unionist gangs started, kind of saying, right, we'll follow a ceasefire as well. And you had John Hume and Gerry Adams talking behind the scenes with each other to try and figure out where can the Republicans like Sinn Féin and the Nationalists like the SDLP, this is the terminology that's used, whether it's correct or not, But they were kind of working behind the scenes, and they kind of figured out how they kind of seen it develop, how they could see it working, And they met with Taoiseach Albert Reynolds, and they kind of outlined, this is how we think politically we can get this job done, in 1984, So, 1995 then, building on that, you had, Gerry Adams and the Taoiseach was Bruton or whatever. They started to talk with John Major, the British Prime Minister at the time, that, to get a peace process kind of underway. And Britain was like, right, if you can prove to us that the IRA are, decommissioning their weapons, we'll let you have a seat at the table. And at this stage now, the IRA had nearly become a bargaining chip, in a lot of ways. They were still active in certain areas, but they were kind of it was that threat, it was the teeth of the politics. It's like that saying, what is it? Politics grows out of the barrel of a gun, or political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. That's basically what the IRA were at this stage. And then Gerry Adams, to kind of hammer that point home, he said in the speech in Belfast at the time, the IRA haven't gone away, it's in this can all go to shit again if it doesn't work. But Sinn Féin kind of were getting messed around, they were kind of getting banned from talks and then brought in and then kicked out again and all. So the IRA then launched the Canary Wharf bombing, and the British were kind of right, that's the biggest bomb that's hit England since World War II. So they were kind of right, we're not going to fucking get this kicked off again. And this is 1986, and then you had Drumcree riots as well this year, and people were fucking getting killed at that too. There was a couple of deaths. It was 2,500 fucking assaults, all this kind of just pure mayhem at the time. The North is still very like that, but you're kind of into 1997, say, when's that? Bertie Ahern and fucking Tony Blair, I suppose, would be. But the Garvaghey Road, that's this was kind of at the peak of that. Back in the 80s, it was bad, but And then in the 90s, it didn't really calm down much. Like, and all it was, like the Garvaghey Road, if you ever look into it, it's because part of the street, like they walk in a loop around the town, and part of the street is, both sides of it is Catholic. And the Catholics were like, well, we don't want you marching through here, like, because the UDA used to turn up, like, you know, and stand in their front gardens with guns, like, sort of, like, we don't want them in here, like. Then you had like the what you call it as well at the same time, the Holy Cross. Do you know, there's a film about that. I have seen it years ago, and I don't remember the name of it, but it was. Remember Paisley and Trimble walking up the road? Yeah, yeah. Like it was the Unionist rioting, like that caused their Garvaghey Road. Like they refused to get rerouted. Do you know, to get the march rerouted. And that's what caused all the fucking hassle. Like. But in July, anyway, 1997, the IRA said, right, they were Sinn Féin was told, right, if the IRA stops, we'll let you into the talks, definitely, like, you know. So the IRA called a ceasefire. But what happened at this ceasefire is that in a house in Donegal, members who were against, they voted. Like, you know, they all agreed amongst themselves that they were going to accept the ceasefire, but some of them didn't. So some of them went off down to Meath, and they established the real IRA. That's where they came out of, was they rejected the peace or the ceasefire that led to the Good Friday Agreement, you know. So in 1988, then you have the Good Friday Agreement. Like only the DUP disagreed with it, but you know, like it was a landslide on both sides of the election or both sides of the border. But then that was in May, that vote was, or whatever. And I think it was like August 1988. I remember this day where it was, like, exactly when the bomb went off. Like, it was the Oma bombing. And that was the single deadliest attack. And like the thing about it is, like, the IRA, or real IRA as they call themselves, like they probably did do it, but at the same time, like the amount of fucking MI5 and bullshit intelligence and false flags and all, you can't be fucking sure on nearly half of this stuff. Like, but you know, the Oma bombing happened anyway. So it was Good Friday Agreement. It got Stormont back up and running after fucking ages. Like, you know, like it was all run out of London this whole time. Like. So it's looking a bit better. Like, you know, there's still people getting fucking killed, you know, and riots constantly in the north. Like, but it's not. But at least there's a kind of a path to you know, where people can see. Like, so, and it was in 2000. Then the fucking thing got suspended again. Like, because the Unionists didn't trust the IRA whenever they said, yeah, we're decommissioning our weapons. Like, but no, like the Unionists wouldn't believe them. And this is also the time whenever the last of the prisoners, like in Long Cash or any of the political prisoners, were being released under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. And like, you also had the loyalists kind of getting put out as well. Like, you know, I think Michael Stone got let out at that stage, you know, for something. I don't even think it was for the murdering 3 people that he was still in jail. I think it was for something else. But anyways, there was more riots in Belfast anyway. That was the Holy Cross dispute then happened around this time as well. Like, RUC got renamed to the PSNA, you know, hired like a couple of like token Catholics and renamed themselves. In Crossmaglen, you had there were the Ogre Sinn Féin group that climbed up the tower and hung a banner saying Ireland for the Irish, or Ireland belongs to the Irish on the side of the tower, you know, which is kind of funny now looking back. Like, it's amazing how much has changed in 20 years, like, you know, how much of a lurch they've taken again from what they were, like. And yeah, there was Rule 21 was removed because of the Good Friday Agreement. Like, the GAA had banned all British soldiers and RUC men from playing in any joining the GAA. So that was removed. Like, I remember that at the time too. That was kind of like a fucking contentious issue. Yeah, you had riots basically constantly, like around 2002. Like, and you had Dennis Donaldson. He was arrested in 2002. he was like one of Sinn Féin's top men, like knew everything about it, and he was arrested for allegedly having a database for the IRA in Stormont. Do you know, like that he was gathering intelligence out of Stormont. But it actually turned out in 2005 that he was a British agent. Jerry Adams released a statement saying Dennis Donaldson has been a British accessory for decades, like, and Dennis Donaldson admitted it. And he wound up dead in a cottage in Glant East. Like, shot him. It was the real IRA claimed responsibility for that, but I don't know who. You know, if I knew that, like, I'd probably be fucking dragged off by the garage or something. But in 2003, then you had an election, and up until this point in the north, it was the SDLP and the Unionist Party, the UUP, that were kind of the two main parties. But it kind of like pushed. They got squeezed out. Sinn Féin and the DUP made massive gains in that election. Like, they became the two main parties for power sharing. You know. So 2004, you have the Northern Bank raid. You all remember that? Like, people were like, you know, unless the IRA fucking stop this shit, like, we're just going to collapse the whole government all over again. 2005, you had Robert McCartney was murdered, and it turned out that it was members of Sinn Féin that did it. So the family, like, you know, Robert McCartney went over to George Bush was the president in America, like, and they were like fucking, you know, going over to kind of get pressure, like, and it was a tense. Fucking, I remember fellas like with high blood pressure, just like you'd think they were going to pass out the chair, like, and they'd be just kind of like, what is happening, like. But yeah, there was this was whenever kind of as well it kind of started going into, like, you know, the investigations and, like, you know, peace and reconciliation and all this. Like, Tony Blair apologized for you know, arresting innocent people and saying that they had done, like, it was like the Guildford bombing, I think. So you had like the historical inquiries team started looking into this, and they started looking into like 3,000 unexplained deaths, you know, or unexplained murders that happened during the Troubles, like, and there's still riots going on at this stage. Like, it's always been fucking riots going on. The UVF, even at this stage, their whatchamacallit, ceasefire, it was rejected by the British because they were like, it's not a ceasefire because you're still shooting loyalists, like, you know, any rival loyalists or anything like that. They started kicking the crap out of each other. And then, like, the Unionists, I don't know, like, there's something not right with them, because they had that Love Ulster march in Dublin, and it ended up in an absolute riot. Like, anywhere they go, it ends up riots, like, you know. So it's kind of like, you know, if something happens like 109 times or something, you know, it could be you rather than the other person, you know. But in 2006, then as well, you had the St Andrews Agreement, and that kind of allowed the North to kind of get back on track. I think that was the policing. There was like a policing issue, like, will Sinn Féin support the new PSNA, you know, and they had to call an Ardèche or whatever, you know. So Sinn Féin had to call an Ardèche because that was a contentious issue. Like, Sinn Féin started booting members out around that time, like ones that wouldn't agree to supporting the PSNA, like, they all fucking got dumped out of the party. And you had Michael Stone as well, the fella that attacked the graveyard. He tried to blow up Stormont at this stage too. It's actually a hilarious video, really, in hindsight. Like, he ran into Stormont with a pipe bomb, and they, like, put their foot in the fucking revolving door, and he got stuck, like, you know. So that was pretty fucking mental. And yeah, you had in 2007 that Peace and Reconciliation group, like, they admitted, they were like, there's no way that you know, like, it was 100% guaranteed that the RUC, the B Specials, the army, or whoever, was all colluding with each other to fucking execute people, like. So yeah, they held an election after all of this came out, and after Sinn Féin had agreed that the PSNA were proper security forces that everyone should follow and all this kind of crack. And that's whenever Paisley and Martin McGuinness then became the first and deputy first ministers, like, and they're the exact same thing. Like, it's deputy first. The only reason that name is on it is because the Unionists wanted to sound like they were in charge. Like, that's literally how sad that is. Like, and that was the official end of Operation Banner that began with the troops going into Derry. Like, that's how long it took. Like, so you kind of move into the kind of modern sphere now. Like, so you have basically like the real IRA or whatever, and the continuity IRA, and all these different kind of IRAs, whatever. They're now they're called the new IRA, but that's kind of like an MA5 term. Like, they don't call themselves that. It's only to kind of annoy them. Like the PSNA have said that. Like, and like they had shot a few soldiers. Like, I think it was like 3 soldiers at one stage. I think it was like the INLA shot one, and or the real IRA have done that. Massacre barracks. And at this stage, like, the Irish government was donating $250,000 to the Orange Men. Like, sure, then you need Richmond, and also kind of makes sense. Like, and Paisley, he stands down then anyway, in whatever year it was, 2008. And it was Peter Robinson. Peter Robinson was, he was the exact same as fucking Martin McGuinness, basically, except a unionist. He was like a UVF fella back in the 70s. Like, there's an unbelievable photo, like, of the first minister of Northern Ireland, like, with a fucking Armalite rifle pointing around the corner up the north, like. And yeah, pretty mad. Like, INLA, they just kind of turned into they quit physical violence, like, and they turned into the Irish Republican Socialist Party, or that's their political wing, and that's the kind of what they are still at. And in 2010, then UDA followed, and it said that all our weapons are destroyed. Whether they did or not, I don't know. Nobody got any proof of them, like, And you had this Iris Robinson scandal as well, like, that Peter Robinson, the deputy first minister, his wife, was funneling money around and sleeping around and all that kind of stuff. And that, you can imagine for, like, staunch, fundamental Protestants, like, that wasn't a good. That wasn't a great thing, like. But eventually, anyway, Sinn Féin and the DUP came to an agreement on police and matters, and, like, this is when Arlene Foster started coming in and out. Like, Martin McGuinness was still the leader of Sinn Féin in the north, and you had Arlene Foster coming in and out, and Peter Robinson then eventually kind of just went to the fucking went to the wayside because he lost his seat to Naomi Long, and you'll know her, like, she's the big blonde woman that runs the Alliance Party. She took his seat, like, and they've been growing very steadily now. Like, they had a massive surge in the last election. Gerry Adams, he was an MP at the time, an abstentionist MP, so he stood down from that. That's whenever he came into and ran in loud. When you had the anyone but Adams vote, I thought it was funny, like, all the like Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, like, they could, at that stage, like, they'd agree on nothing, but they would agree that they just didn't want Adams in the Dáil, like. So the North was a mess at this stage. Like, it really, like, it was barely functioning. You had strikes going on in the public sector all the time. They couldn't sort out the fucking infrastructure. Like they had to import, like, fucking thousands of bottles of water from, like, Scotland or something, because they couldn't keep the water works going, like, which is a bit mental, like, in the, first world country in 2010. But riots going on anyway, and in 2012, that's whenever Martin McGuinness and the Queen met and shook hands, and that was like a very kind of fucking it was divisive in a way, like, like, this is the thing, like, northern politics, there's always kind of permutations and all that, but it seems to be kind of at a stage now where it's kind of like it's kind of gone from, like, the moderates, the Unionist Party and the SDLP, and then it went out to the extremes of kind of, like, basically Sinn Féin and the DUP, which was it was just a case of well, we support Palestine, and they were like, oh, we don't like Palestine, we support Israel. Like that's the level of childishness, like in a lot of northern politics, like, and it's always a one-upmanship thing, like. So that's why, like, now you have, because the place isn't fucking functioning properly at all, like, so that's why you see, the Alliance Party kind of grow and all these kind of other parties, like, because Sinn Féin and the UP are, they're not fit to run a country together, like, or run a state together. And then you also had at this stage the fucking, the councils in England, or not in England, in the north, decided that they would limit the amount of days the flags would be flown on public buildings. Like, it wouldn't be like 365 days a year Union Jacks, like. And there was this thing anyway, and you can barely believe it, like, it was the flag riots. And that was all like Willie Fraser and all these kind of like extreme loyalist kind of types from the past, like, and there's a fella, I won't name names, but you'll probably know him. He's an ex-Orange Order member from the north, and he was involved with all that crack, like, as well. Like, he set up a political party, like, that kind of with Willie Fraser, that kind of just went to vote, and then he came into southern politics, or helping a fella out in southern politics. But then, like, Jerry Adams' brother gets sentenced for raping his daughter, pure mess, like, and then Jerry Adams got arrested himself over Jean McConville. He got put in jail for 4 days, like, whenever he was told to go up to Antrim, and they fucking arrested him and told him, right, you're sitting here until you answer all our questions. 2015, much of the same. You had bombs being planted and strikes going on. Like, the north just isn't a functioning country. Like. And Arlene Foster officially takes over then from Peter Robinson. And that lasted about a year, because they had this, she was like the minister for whatever it was it agriculture or something, before she became the first minister. And she was running a scheme called the renewable heating incentive. And it was basically a way to burn fuel and get paid to do it. Like, and there was a big, massive disaster about it. And, what do you call it? Like, it was millions and millions went fucking haywire, like, out of this harebrained scheme. Like, there was no upper limit, so you could just burn timber in an empty shed, like, and get paid to do it, like. So, anyway, she wouldn't step aside until the investigation went through, and Martin McGuinness was just like, this. He was at his wit's end. He was dying as well at this stage, like, and he was just like, oh, fuck this, like, he was just like, I'm pulling it. We're just collapsed the fucking thing. And that's whenever you had the longest gap of governance, of no government being in charge of a country since, what was it, like Belgium in World War II or something like that. It went on for like 3 years. And like in that 3 years, that's whenever you had abortion pushed through by Westminster, Sinn Féin cheering it on, of course. Like, this is how fucking crazy, like, Sinn Féin have gone in the last, since the Good Friday Agreement. It's like, it's haywire. You know yourself what they're like in the south. In the north, they're nearly as bad, like, but there is a difference between northern and southern Sinn Féin. Like, it's an interesting thing. If you start watching them, like the Belfast Telegraph, or even the BBC News, or even on Public, even, like, it's a great way of figuring out, like, there's a lot of fucking bullshit going on in Sinn Féin. Like, they've booted more members to try and shape themselves into something that they aren't, like, like anyone that wasn't a fucking, like, basically an unabashed communist in my part of the country got fucking booted in whatever it was, 2000, around the time Pierce Doherty got elected. A couple of fellas got told to get out. And it's the bake my cake situation. Like, news in Northern Ireland is kind of, it's strange. Like, if you watch, it's like it's like Mayo or something. Like, that's the amount of crack that happens up there, except everyone in Mayo is just like, a tinderbox ready to just start kicking the crap out of each other. And then, like, you had that car bomb in 2019, the new IRA thing, like, it's basically parish politics, except things keep exploding and riots breaking out all the time, like, and it's not, like, that was a whole kind of point of me fucking going through this, like, that it's like people kind of get very standoffish or something when it comes to northern politics, and I just wanted to kind of do a video to kind of to try and get people encouraged to, you know, that it's not that complicated, like, but it's like it's a big thing. Like you're leaving it to like Sinn Féin or even into like if nationalists in the south don't get involved in the north, you know, like I'm a border guy, so like I kind of, you know, it's kind of just by chance I kind of got interested in this, but like the last thing we need in this country is a 32 county Ireland and Sinn Féin running the whole fucking lot of it. Like that's no good for nobody except, you know, Sinn Féin and fucking woke. So yeah, that's why I'm putting together like it's not quite a reeling in the ears type thing, like, but it'll be basically what I talked about here. But I've been gathering up all the footage and editing it down, you know, into the different things that happened, you know, along the way, like, you know, in radio interviews, playing over whatever, you know, footage. But it's just I was kind of laying out what how things happen, like, and yeah, I'm hoping that the North kind of gets a bit more love, like, because it's an absolute it's pure clown show, like all that cash for ash, like it's so childish, it's unbelievable. It actually would make your head hurt, like, you know, a lot of people, that's why have switched off in the North, like, you know, like, oh, it's just like, oh, just vote the Alliance Party because they don't want the DUP and they don't want Sinn Féin. But that's why I can see like that if you have, like, say, a socially conservative nationalist party, like, I reckon there's a good chance of that getting traction in the North, you know. So anyways, that was kind of a very low quality rundown of the northern situation, but hopefully it kind of like it just kind of, you know, it helps, like, if you're trying to like chat about the North or something like that, or get involved in northern politics, maybe it might have some bit of help to you, or, you know, whatever. But yeah, I'm over the hour mark anyway. I think I'll yeah, cash for ash, I'll have to go. So Brave Brew, the Alliance Party. Do you know, I didn't even know they existed. I didn't think they existed until like the 90s. I didn't know that they were like from the 70s. Like, I suppose they only kind of had a flash in the pan in like 1974, and then in the last like 10 years or whatever, they've kind of like come out of nowhere. And it's like, I don't know, but like their leadership and all, it doesn't seem very high quality. Like, so I don't know how that's. I think northern politics needs a bit of a shake up, like, you know. And yeah, that's actually one last point that I'll make about this is like that whenever there is unification in this country, whatever the North is, like, that has to meld or, you know, join in with the South, like, you know, and it's like whenever that happens, there's going to be serious opportunities for either good or bad to change the rules, you know, like around policing, around economics, around infrastructure, all this kind of stuff, like, and it's like that's the biggest opportunity, like, for changing Ireland into what it's going to be like in the future. So it's kind of like we owe it, you know, if we're working hard in the south, like, we have to work hard in the north as well, or else it's kind of like someone else is just going to swoop in and fucking completely make a total balls of everything and change us into like some little European statelet, or as some people are saying this last fucking while, rejoin the Commonwealth. It's like, what was the whole war of independence about? Like, anyways, yeah, that's my kind of rant over. But yeah, I think hopefully I get this documentary done soon enough, and it'll be I think it looks pretty good so far. Like, so, but it's just there's a lot of stuff to go through. So yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. And yeah, if there's any questions or anything, you know, fuck it, I'll throw up a link to anything you need in the comment section, because I miss our cousins across the border. I just want them. I want them to fucking know what it's like to live in a functional state, and I would also like to live in a functional state. So that's about it. Thanks again, and good night, everyone.